Ladies, gentlemen, theys, and thems. What you just heard was in fact not a snippet of leaked audio from the latest Diddy party.
Savage! I'm a savage! Oh!
P. Diddy be wanting the body.
And you gotta tell him no.
No, what you actually listened to was 40 seconds of perhaps the most aggressive, intense, and unforgiving album ever recorded. And every one of those recordings were done, of all places, at a famous corporate radio station. An important question that you might be asking yourself right now is, who exactly was it that was making all that crazy noise? Well, it just so happened to be the legendary grindcore band known as Napalm Death. What's going on, everybody? My name is Quentin, and welcome to Audio Q, the channel where I talk about the music that I love to listen to and believe that you deserve to know about. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the band Napalm Death, one of my favorite bands of all time, and my favorite album that they've ever released, the Earache Peel Sessions, released in 2014. Hailing from the United Kingdom, Napalm Death have been a fixture of what's known as the grindcore music scene since the early 1980s. Not only is Napalm Death responsible for developing this genre in the first place, but the band's former drummer, a man by the name of Mick Harris, claimed that he was the one who actually came up with the term grindcore during an interview. Grindcore came from grind, which was the only word I could use to describe Swans after buying their first record in '84. Then with this new hardcore movement that started to really blossom in '85, I thought grind really fit because of the speed, so I started to call it grindcore. Now, on the other hand, Napalm's bassist and longest tenured member of the band, Shane Embry, gave a different take on how his band cultivated the grindcore sound during an interview that took place in 2001. As far as how this whole sound got started, we were really into Celtic Frost, Siege, which is a hardcore band from Boston, a lot of hardcore and death metal bands, and some industrial noise bands like the early Swans. So we just create a mesh of all those things. It's just everything going at 100 miles per hour, basically. To explain it in simple terms, the core, no pun intended, of the grindcore sound is basically like as if hardcore punk and thrash metal did the fusion dance from Dragon Ball Z and created a very fast, very loud, and very abrasive musical entity. But absent are the wild guitar solos and the decent production that's typically found in thrash metal, or the somewhat slower paced and more traditionally structured songs seen in hardcore punk. Grindcore musicians aim to play as fast as humanly possible, to tune their instruments as low as physically possible, and the lyrical content of this subgenre borrows a lot from its punk rock ancestors, by usually revolving around subject matter like social equality, corporate greed, women's rights, racial equality, government corruption, anger, depression, and so on. Basically, if you take the music from Judas Priest's Painkiller album, but remove the solos, tune down the guitars, replace Rob Halford's high-pitched screaming with guttural and insufferable growling, and sprinkle in some left-wing socio-political lyrics from punk bands like the Dead Kennedys, you get exactly what Napalm Death is about and what they've been about for the last 40 years. And between 1987 and 1990, a time period regarded by many fans of the band as their musical peak, Napalm Death were invited to the BBC Radio 1 station to perform on 3 separate occasions to record their music live in studio and have those same recordings broadcast over the airwaves at a later date. Now, just in case what I said happened to go in one ear and out the other, I'll go ahead and repeat that for you. Napalm Death, the grindcore band, were invited and allowed by BBC Radio 1, the world-famous corporate-owned radio station, to specifically perform and record live versions of their songs for the sole purpose of having their music played on the radio where it could be heard by a large audience of listeners. Just hearing myself say that sounds mind-boggling. I mean, over here in the US, back in the late 80s, there were parents in the suburbs freaking out over their kids listening to bands like Slayer, Motley Crue, and even Metallica. I can only imagine how some of those same parents would have reacted if they walked past their kid's bedroom and heard Napalm Death blaring out of the speaker. The guy responsible for getting the band's music played across British airwaves was a legendary English radio host, John Peel. John Peel's radio show featured a popular segment called the Peel Sessions, in which he would bring in artists onto his show to perform their music live. Because his show had a total of over 4,000 sessions, recorded by over 2,000 different artists between 1967 and up until his death in 2004, Peel Sessions are known for being very diverse, featuring all kinds of music like pop, hip-hop, electronic music, dance music, heavy metal, and even reggae. During the late 80s, Peel began to invite various bands onto the show to perform what was simply known back then as extreme music, and Napalm Death was one of those bands. Peel, who himself was actually a huge fan of the band's music, was also their biggest supporter in the music industry and helped them break into the mainstream by introducing them on his radio show. He once said during an interview, Napalm Death, whose LP Scum boasts 28 tracks of quite exceptionally rapid music, described on the sleeve as savagely brutal hardcore thrash, sounded as if they were playing soundtracks of the end of civilization. I liked them a lot. Mark Greenway, who also goes by the nickname Barney, and who has performed as Napalm's vocalist since joining the band back in 1989, once referred to Peel's relationship with the band as essential to their rise in popularity due to his praise. The first two sessions that the band recorded were initially released in 1989 as an LP by Strange Fruit Recordings, an independent label that was co-owned by Peel. In 1993, the third session was released for a reissue of the album, before all three sessions were finally released together in 2000. Then, years later in 2014, the three sessions were remastered and reissued under the label known as Earache Records, as a part of their massive Grind Madness at the BBC compilation album, which also contains other extreme music bands similar to Napalm Death. Okay, so now that we understand some of the history behind this album's creation, let's finally dig into the music.
And tonight, the debut session, as I hinted at the beginning of the programme, of Napalm Death. And in the course of the session, they did quite a few songs, but they've grouped them together in bunches of 2 or 3 at a time. And here are the first 3. The last of them is called Dead. The one in the middle is called Prison Without Walls. And we start with The Kill.
During the band's first session on the radio show, they performed a small handful of songs featured on Scum, their debut album that came out in 1987. They also played some songs that wound up being on the band's second studio album, titled From Enslavement to Obliteration. By the way, here's an interesting side note for my fellow Napalm Death fans watching this video. The one song from this recording that wasn't on the band's first album, on any of their later material, or even featured on any of their demos from the band's early years is track number 6, which is titled In Extremis. I tried doing some research on the song while I was editing this video, and I found absolutely nothing pertaining to it outside of it being a part of this album. I couldn't find any other versions of the song on YouTube, and it doesn't show up anywhere else in Napalm Death's catalog, so I'm guessing that maybe this was a song that they were planning to put out on their second album, but for whatever reason, they just decided not to use it. Just to be clear, however, that's just pure speculation on my part, so maybe when you guys are watching this can give me some insight about this down below. If you've only heard the studio versions of these songs and thought to yourself, damn, this stuff sounds pretty intense, you're about to find out that these versions sound even crazier. Just listen to how demented some of these songs sound compared to the other versions. According to Mick Harris, the band's drummer at the time, the whole band enjoyed being on Peel's show. He said, quote, "That first Napalm Death session had a huge impact. It was nearly perfect. It was like doing a great live recording, but more relaxed. A good experience. I think Peel enjoyed it too. He repeated it 3 times. When he wasn't banging on his drum set like he had just snorted a bag of the cartel's purest baking powder, he also did backup vocals to complement the growls of Lee Dorian, Napalm Death's vocalist at the time. Those crazy, animalistic shrieking sounds that sounded like a pissed off house cat. Yeah, that was him."
Gary Davis was telling me this afternoon how much he was looking forward to the second session from Napalm Death, and I'm sure he'll have entirely approved of all of that. The titles there were Multinational Corporations, Instinct of Survival, Stigmatized, and Parasites.
6 months later, on March 8, 1988, the band showed up at BBC Radio 1's headquarters once again to record another session with John Peel. And to say that the band brought their A game during this round would be an understatement, because they somehow managed to turn up the aggression even more this time. Just like the first time Napalm Death entered BBC's radio station, this session contained songs from the band's first 2 albums, and the difference between the studio versions of these songs and the way that they're performed here is, once again, noticeably different. When I listen to the second session, it makes me think that the band were purposely trying to one-up their first appearance on the show. And I'd be lying to you if I said that I didn't think they did a damn good job of it.
Embry bass, Jesse Pintado and Mitch Harris on guitars, Barney or Mark Greenway on lead vocals. And this is, well, there are 2 numbers here, Unchallenged Hate and Murdered Mentally.
A total of 2 years and 6 months went by before Napalm Death would come back for their third and final Peel session. With the band having lost and gained new band members since last time, this session features vocalist Mark Barney Greenway, along with 2 American guitar players, Jesse Pintado and Mitch Harris. Mitch Harris and Mick Harris aren't related, by the way. I just figured I should explain that before I move on. Just like in the case of the other 2 sessions, the band stuck to playing material from their first 2 records, except for one particular song that I'm about to talk about in a little bit. With only 7 songs, this session has the shortest track list out of them all, and starts off with the track Unchallenged Hate, one of Napalm Death's most popular songs, and I'd say probably the heaviest song in existence that speaks out against racism. The track Suffer the Children, which is another popular song from the band, was at the time a new song that was slated to appear a couple months later on their third album, Harmony Corruption. When it comes to the vocals, this session has the best vocals out of them all to me. Barney absolutely sounds like a man possessed by about 100 demons, and Mitch's unhinged screaming just plays perfectly off of that. their voices just fit so well together. It reminds me of bacon and eggs or watching pro wrestling and seeing someone get hit in the head with a steel chair. It's like, sure, on their own, those things are cool, but when you combine them together, they're even better. Musically, I would say that this is my least favorite of the Napalm Death Peel sessions. It's not because the music sounds bad by any means, and like I said earlier, I think that Barney's voice sounds really good here, but it's because this session features a few less songs that I'm a fan of, and also because the performance on this one sounds a little too tight, if you know what I mean. It sounds more polished than the other two. When you compare it to the second Peel session, which is my favorite, there's a small drop in the aggression coming from the instruments. Session 2 for me is fun, chaotic, and catchy despite being a little sloppy. Listening to it makes you feel like you're riding on top of a speeding train that could derail and tip over at any moment. Whereas listening to Session 3 gives me the impression that the band probably did a few rehearsals in the studio before they hit the record button. I'd say that out of the 3 sessions, Session 2 is the best one, and although I love the vocal performance on Session 3, the slightly weaker song selection that it has puts it in 3rd place for me. But overall, I think that this is a phenomenal album, and whether you're a fan of Napalm Death, a fan of grindcore music, or even if you think this stuff just sounds ridiculous, there's some guaranteed moments on this album that'll make you squint your eyes and make you want to say, well, that's going to be it for this video. I hope that you guys really enjoyed it. Not just for those watching who are fans of extreme music like I am, but especially for the people who clicked on this video and had no idea what they just heard. On this channel, I'm going to be making more video essays about all sorts of music artists and different kinds of genres. So make sure that you hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you'll be alerted as soon as I drop a new video. So until next time, take care, don't be a square, and listen to more music.